The border clinic had been designed by someone who believed optimism could replace funding. The walls were thin, the lights flickered with the confidence of gamblers, and the sterilization unit made a noise like a small animal reconsidering its life choices. Garrett had learned to ignore all of it. If you listened too closely to a place like this, it started telling you things you didn't want to know. He was finishing a routine scan on a miner who had definitely not fallen off a hover cart when the alarms went off. Not the loud alarms. Those were reserved for fires and radiation leaks and events that came with paperwork. These were the subtle ones, the kind that suggested someone was being dragged inside against their will. Garrett sighed, sealed the scan, and told the miner to stop bleeding on the floor on his way out. Then he reached for gloves. They brought her in on a cargo stretcher that had seen better decades. She was unconscious, breathing shallowly, blood dark against pale skin. At first glance, she looked human, which on the border usually meant she wasn't. Her ears extended longer than any baseline human variant, tapering back in a smooth arc that would have made cosmetic surgeons cry with envy. Garrett clocked the ears, then the wound in her side, then the multiple bruises that suggested she'd met something large, fast and unfriendly. "Unknown species?" one of the carriers asked. "Unknown patients bleed just like known ones," Garrett said. "Put her there." They did. The carriers left quickly, as people tended to do once responsibility had been successfully transferred. Garrett activated the scanners, which hummed politely, and then began throwing symbols across the air in a language that claimed to be standardized, but clearly enjoyed lying. "All right," Garrett muttered. "Let's see what makes you tick." Her physiology unfolded on the display in cooperative layers. Internals aligned cleanly with human norms, give or take some elegant deviations. Secondary organs he didn't recognize tucked themselves neatly where space allowed, as if they'd planned ahead. He felt a flicker of professional admiration. "Well," he said to no one, "at least you didn't go for the completely incomprehensible model." The wound was bad but not terminal. Energy discharge, probably. Cleaned, sealed, stabilized. He worked steadily, hands moving from long habit rather than urgency. This was what he did. People arrived broken. He fixed what he could. They left. Sometimes they thanked him, sometimes they didn't. Either way, the clinic reset and waited for the next problem. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled. He logged the treatment, tagged the case, and was halfway through deciding whether he deserved a real meal or another nutrient bar when her fingers closed around his wrist. Not weakly, not reflexively, purposefully. Garrett froze. Her eyes opened, dark and focused far too quickly for someone who'd been unconscious moments earlier. She looked at him like someone recognizing a landmark they'd studied their entire life. "You live," she said. Her accent bent the words slightly like gravity pulling at sound. "Therefore, I live." "Well," Garrett said carefully, "that's one way to look at it." Her grip tightened. Not painful. Assessing. "You are the anchor," she said. "I'm the guy who stitched you up," he replied. "Close enough, but let's not get poetic." She blinked, processing. Then she nodded once with the solemnity of someone accepting an irreversible truth. "My savior," she said. Garrett snorted despite himself. "Easy there. I didn't even charge you." Her brows knit together. Confusion, sharp and immediate. "You refused the bond?" "What bond?" She released his wrist and sat up with alarming ease, glancing down at her bandages with mild interest. "The life debt," she said. "It has been established." Garrett stared at her. He glanced at the scanner. It helpfully confirmed she was stable and did nothing to address the conversation. "No," he said. "No, that's not how this works. You were injured. I fixed you. That's healthcare." Her long ears twitched, a subtle movement that felt like punctuation. "You restored continuity of my existence." "Yes," Garrett said. "Again, my job." She studied his face closely, head tilting. "You are modest to the point of pathology. Occupational hazard." She swung her legs off the table and stood, a little unsteady but upright. She faced him fully now, expression intent, almost reverent. "I am Kyreth," she said, "and until the debt is answered, I will not leave you." Garrett laughed. He couldn't help it. The absurdity slipped under his defenses and came out as a short, incredulous bark. "That's good," he said, still smiling. Because visiting hours don't start for another 6 hours. She did not smile back. And that, Garrett realized with a faint chill, might be a problem. Garrett discovered the problem with people who believed in unbreakable life debts was not the belief itself, but the follow-through. Kyreth did not leave. This became apparent within the first hour, during which she remained standing exactly 3 steps behind him as he cleaned instruments, logged reports, and attempted to pretend he wasn't being quietly evaluated by an alien woman with long ears and unsettling posture discipline. "You can sit," he said eventually, without turning around. "I am standing guard." "Against what?" She paused, considering. "Possibilities. That's not helpful." "Most dangers are not," she replied calmly. Garrett closed his eyes for a second. Border clinics attracted all kinds, but this was new. He turned to face her, putting on the expression he usually reserved for people who tried to pay him in rare metals or religious blessings. "Kyreth," he said, "you're stable. You're mobile. There's a transit hub 2 kilometers east. You can go." Her ears flicked back slightly. "I will not. I'm not keeping you here." "You are not required to," she said. "I am required to stay." He waved a hand between them. "By what authority?" "Biology." Garrett laughed again, because if he didn't, he suspected he might start yelling. "That's not how biology works." Kyreth tilted her head. "You are incorrect." She said it gently, the way one might correct a child who believed stars were holes in the sky. She stepped closer, close enough that the scanner lights reflected faintly in her eyes. "When my vital processes were failing," she continued, "my species initiates bond-receptive states. Neural markers shift. Survival becomes paired with external continuity. You restored that continuity." "You're saying you imprinted on me." She considered the word. "That is offensively simplified, but adjacent." Garrett ran a hand through his hair. Okay. Let's say, hypothetically, that this is real. There are procedures, paperwork, cultural exceptions. You don't get to just move in." "I have not moved in," she said. "I am positioned." She gestured toward the corner of the room where she had placed herself earlier, perfectly aligned with the entrance and the hallway beyond. Garrett stared. "You chose that spot deliberately." "Yes." "Why?" "Optimal response angle. Also, the floor tile there is warmer." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Fine. He tried another angle. "Kyreth, listen. I didn't save you as a personal act. I didn't choose you. You came in bleeding and I treated you. That's not a bond. That's triage." Her expression shifted. Not hurt, not angry, but genuinely puzzled. "You separate intention from outcome." "Yes," he said. "We do that a lot. That is inefficient." Before he could respond, the front alarm chimed. Not the subtle one this time, but the general entry tone. Garrett turned automatically. "Stay here," he said. "I will remain within effective range," Kyreth replied. "That was not what I—" "Never mind." The visitor was a traitor with a minor burn and a major attitude. Garrett fell into routine, examining the injury, dispensing instructions, issuing warnings that would almost certainly be ignored. All the while he felt it, that sensation you get when someone is watching you too intently. When the traitor glanced past Garrett and noticed Kyreth, he froze. "Is that with you?" the traitor asked carefully. "Yes," Garrett said quickly. "Patient, recovering. Please don't stare." Kyreth stared back, unblinking. The traitor paid and left in record time. When Garrett turned, Kyreth was still there, still watching him. "You intimidated him," Garrett said. "I assessed him," she replied. "He had hostile probabilities. He had a bad personality." Also that. Hours passed. Kyreth did not sleep. She asked questions instead, about the clinic, about his routines, about why he lived alone so far from population centers. "You prefer isolation," she concluded. "I prefer quiet," Garrett said. "There's a difference." "You are quiet even when others are absent," she observed. He frowned. "That's not relevant." "It is to bond fulfillment." "There is no bond." She let the statement pass without comment, which somehow felt worse. Night came. Garrett locked the clinic and prepared the cot in the back room. For her, he insisted. She examined it, then repositioned it closer to his door. "So you can hear if I need help?" he asked. "So I can intervene if you do," she said. He pointed at the cot. "You sleep, I will sleep. Tomorrow we contact someone from your people and sort this out." Kyreth sat, folded her legs neatly, and looked up at him. "Very well. We will sort it out." Her tone suggested she was humoring him. As Garrett lay down, staring at the ceiling, he became uncomfortably aware of something he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, the clinic felt occupied, and for reasons he didn't yet want to examine, that unsettled him far less than it should have. By the third day, Garrett accepted two things as unavoidable facts. First, Kyreth was not leaving. Second, she was better at his job than she had any right to be. It began subtly. He caught her recalibrating the intake scanner while he was brewing something that legally qualified as coffee. She adjusted the harmonic filters with careful precision, her long ears twitching as if listening to frequencies he couldn't hear. "That machine hasn't been tuned in years," he said. "It was lying to itself," she replied. "I corrected it." The scanner purred afterward, producing readings with suspicious enthusiasm. Then there was the inventory. Garrett had survived for years by knowing roughly where things were, which was a skill somewhere between competence and chaos. Kyreth replaced this system with labeled containers, categorized shelves, and a quiet satisfaction that radiated from her posture. "You reorganized my entire storage room," he said, staring. "Yes." "In an hour?" "Yes." "I couldn't do that in a week." She considered this. "You would have been interrupted." "That's not the point." Patience noticed too. A smuggler with a cracked rib stared openly as Kyreth assisted, her movements smooth, hands steady, anticipating Garrett's needs before he voiced them. "Is she your partner?" the smuggler asked. "No," Garrett said. "Yes," Kyreth said. Garrett coughed. "No." She tilted her head. "Functionally, yes." The smuggler grinned. "Lucky you." He left before Garrett could respond. Between patients, Garrett tried again. "This situation is temporary," he said, leaning against the counter. "You can't just attach yourself to me because of a misunderstanding." Kyreth was sterilizing instruments. "It is not attachment. It is alignment." "That sounds worse." "You are unused to being prioritized," he scoffed. "That's not true." She glanced at him. Just a glance. Somehow it felt like she'd scanned him more thoroughly than any machine. "You eat nutrient bars meant for emergency use," she said. "You sleep in intervals. You maintain defensive measures for a threat profile you claim does not exist. No one has optimized your survival parameters." Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it. "That is not your responsibility," he said eventually. She returned to her work. "It is now." The humor crept in during the smaller moments. When she stood too close while he worked, he taped a line on the floor and declared it a personal space perimeter. She studied it, then stood exactly 1 centimeter outside it, eyes bright with what might have been amusement. When she insisted on standing outside the clinic at night, he handed her a blanket. She accepted it solemnly and wore it like ceremonial armor. "You know there are no predators here," he said. She looked at the darkness beyond the lights. "You are here. That's not comforting." On the 5th day, trouble arrived. A group of off-world traders entered the clinic loudly, armed in the casual way people on the border pretended was harmless. Garrett felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the calculation of risk, the awareness of how alone he was. Kyreth stepped forward before he could speak. "You will lower your weapons," she said calmly. One of them laughed. "Or what?" She named him. Not his alias, not his trade name, his birth designation, spoken with flawless accuracy. She described in precise and unemotional terms how his left knee would fail if he advanced another step. He froze. They all did. Garrett stared at her. "Kyreth," she glanced back. "They are resolved." The traders left without incident. Afterward, Garrett leaned against the wall, exhaling shakily. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," she said. "You did not perceive the threat." "I would have managed." "Yes," she agreed, "with injury likelihood." He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You're terrifying." She seemed pleased. "That is reassuring." That night, as they shared a quiet meal, real food because she'd somehow arranged that too, Garrett realized something else. He wasn't arguing as much. Her presence filled the clinic, filled the silence. He found himself explaining things he hadn't explained to anyone in years, complaining, joking, existing out loud. "This doesn't change anything," he said, more to himself than her. Kyreth looked at him across the table. "Change is already in progress." He smiled despite himself. "You're very confident for someone who crash-landed into my life bleeding." "I recovered," she said simply, "and now I remain." For the first time, Garrett didn't immediately object, and that scared him more than any threat she'd chased away. By the time Garrett realized Kyreth had upgraded his life, it was too late to stop her. The first sign was the water recycler. Garrett noticed it one morning because it didn't make its usual grinding noise, the one that sounded like a dying appliance begging for mercy. Instead, it purred. Actually purred. He stared at it for a full 10 seconds, waiting for the sound to collapse back into familiar misery. It did not. "Kyreth," he called cautiously. "Yes," she replied from somewhere behind him, which was becoming a recurring problem. "What did you do to the recycler?" "I optimized it. It's 20 years old." "Yes," it was embarrassed. He rubbed his face. "You can't just... How did you even access the core?" She lifted a small component between two fingers. "You left the panel unsecured." "That was intentional." "For what purpose?" "So I could pretend I'd fix it someday." She looked genuinely concerned. "That is an inefficient coping strategy." That should have been the end of it. A brief argument, some sarcasm, maybe a warning about not touching his equipment without permission. Instead, Garrett noticed something else. The air in the clinic felt cleaner. The lighting adjusted subtly throughout the day, brightening when his alertness dipped, dimming when his eyes strained. The temperature stopped fluctuating between medically acceptable and mild punishment. Even the chairs in the waiting area had been repositioned to minimize patient anxiety. "You're profiling my patients now?" Garrett asked when he noticed. "I am reducing their stress responses," Kyreth said, "which improves your success rates." "I didn't ask you to." "No," she agreed, "but you benefit." She had started doing that, agreeing, then continuing anyway. It wasn't just the clinic, it was him. She began intercepting his worst habits with quiet determination. When he reached for a nutrient bar, she placed a real meal in front of him. When he stayed up too late reviewing reports, she stood between him and the console until he relented. "You are obstructing my work," he said once. "You are degrading your cognitive function," she replied. "This is corrective." "I am not a malfunctioning device." She paused, studying him. "You are organic. You malfunction more frequently." He laughed before he could stop himself. It startled them both. The humor softened something between them. Their conversation shifted from arguments to negotiations, then to commentary. She learned his dry sarcasm and occasionally attempted it herself, with mixed results. "You are being reckless," she said once, as he reached for a faulty power conduit. "Living on the edge," he replied. She nodded solemnly. "Yes, I have recalculated the edge. It is unnecessary." Patients began asking questions. Not directly, border etiquette discouraged curiosity, but the looks lingered. A few asked if Kyreth was his assistant. One asked if she was his bodyguard. A child asked if she was a space elf. Kyreth considered the question seriously. "I am not an elf, but I am from space." The child accepted this. Garrett found himself defending her presence automatically. He stopped explaining, stopped insisting she'd leave soon. Somewhere between the third repaired system and the fifth meal, she insisted he sit down to eat. The idea of the clinic without her felt oddly incomplete. The science of her bond emerged slowly, in pieces she offered when he asked, and sometimes when he didn't. "The debt is not servitude," she explained one evening as they reviewed a star map she'd projected onto the wall. "It is not submission, it is convergence. When survival is shared, futures become linked." "That sounds dangerously close to destiny," Garrett said. She considered. "Destiny implies inevitability. This is preference." He raised an eyebrow. "You prefer me?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You were kind when you did not have to be." "I charged you," he reminded her. "You charged me less than the standard rate," he snorted. "That's because you were bleeding." Exactly. That night an alert woke him from sleep. Not the clinic alarm, something else. a subtle vibration through the floor. Garrett was on his feet instantly, pulse racing. Kyreth was already there, between him and the door. "Stay back," she said. "What is it?" he whispered. "Someone testing boundaries." The sensors confirmed it moments later, a probe skimming the perimeter, scanning, retreating. "Who would be looking for you?" Garrett asked. Kyreth didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful. "People who see bonds as resources." The probe vanished. The silence returned. Garrett exhaled slowly. "You could have gotten me killed just by staying." She turned to him. "I have prevented that outcome multiple times." He met her gaze. "You don't know that." "I do," she said gently. "You simply never notice." The truth of that settled uncomfortably between them. Later, as dawn crept in and the clinic lights adjusted automatically, her doing, Garrett sat at the counter, staring at nothing in particular. "You know," he said, "this was supposed to be temporary." "Yes, and now my life has been reorganized by an alien with a superiority complex." She tilted her head. "Is it improved?" He thought about the quiet, the safety, the company. "Yes," he admitted. She smiled then. Not wide, not triumphant, just satisfied. "Good," she said. "Then the bond is progressing normally." Garrett laughed softly, shaking his head. That, he realized with a mix of dread and warmth, might be the most dangerous sentence she'd said yet. The first thing Garrett noticed was that Kyreth stopped humming. She'd never admitted to it, but when she worked, really worked, there was a low, almost inaudible vibration she produced, something between a hum and a resonance. He'd assumed it was a quirk of her species, or perhaps an unintended side effect of whatever internal systems allowed her to process threats before they happened. When it stopped, the clinic felt wrong. "You're quiet," Garrett said, glancing up from a data slate. "I am listening elsewhere," Kyreth replied. "That sounds ominous." "Yes," he frowned. "Care to elaborate?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the front console. Long ears angled back in a way Garrett had learned meant heightened focus. The perimeter sensors flared briefly, then settled. "Someone has been mapping your location," she said, "from a distance." Garrett leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess, not a fan club?" "No." "Is it about you?" "Likely," he sighed. "I was hoping for a quiet week." "Your hope was statistically optimistic." Despite himself, he smiled. "You're learning sarcasm." "I am adapting." The humor didn't quite land this time. Something tight settled in his chest. Over the next few days, the clinic saw fewer patients. Not because fewer people were injured, border space never slowed, but because word had spread. People talked about the long-eared woman who stood like a sentry, about how trouble seemed to evaporate when she looked at it too closely. Garrett didn't mind the quiet. It gave him too much time to think. "You never told me why they'd come after you," he said one evening, while Kyreth adjusted a shield frequency he hadn't known existed. She hesitated. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "My people do not travel alone," she said carefully. "When we do, it is notable." "That's not an answer. It is a warning." He watched her. "You could leave." She turned to him slowly. "You no longer ask me to." He didn't respond. The attack came without drama. No alarms, no explosions, just a sudden distortion in the air, like heat shimmer without heat. Garrett barely had time to register it before Kyreth moved. Fast, precise, positioning herself between him and the distortion. "Down," she said. He didn't argue. The clinic's shielding flared as something struck it. Garrett crawled behind the counter, heart hammering, hands shaking despite years of crisis training. "What is it?" he shouted. "A test," Kyreth replied. "They are cautious." "Well, that's polite of them," he snapped. "Another impact, stronger." Kyreth extended one hand, palm outward. Symbols, alien, elegant, absolutely not meant for human eyes, flickered across her skin. The air thickened, then snapped back into place. Silence. Garrett waited, counted breaths. When nothing else happened, he pushed himself up. "You okay?" he asked. Kyreth nodded. "Yes." "You're bleeding." She glanced down at the faint line of blue-tinged blood along her arm. Superficial. Sit, he said automatically. She hesitated. Kyreth. She sat. As Garrett cleaned the wound, his hands steadier than he felt, he laughed softly. You realize this is incredibly ironic. She looked at him. Explain. I patched you up. You stuck around to protect me. Now you're getting hurt doing it. This fulfills the bond, she said. He paused. What? If I save your life, the debt can be discharged. The words landed heavily between them. You knew that, he said quietly. Yes. And you didn't tell me. I did not intend to require it. He finished bandaging her arm, more carefully than necessary. You could have died. She met his gaze. So could you. The humor fled then, replaced by something raw. That's not acceptable, he said. To you, she replied. It is logical. He stood abruptly pacing. This isn't a transaction. You don't get to balance the scales by throwing yourself in front of weapons. She watched him with unsettling calm. You did the same. That was different. How? I didn't have a choice. Neither did I. The silence stretched. Later that night, after reinforcing every system he could think of, and several he couldn't, Garrett sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the floor. You can't keep doing this, he said. I can, Kyreth replied, but I will reconsider the method. He laughed weakly. That's reassuring. She sat beside him, close but not touching. You are distressed. Occupational hazard. Garrett, he looked at her. The bond does not require self-destruction, she said softly. It requires survival, shared. Something in her tone shifted, less certainty, more question. You don't want to leave, he said. No. And you don't want to stay because you have to. She nodded slowly. Correct. The implication settled over him like gravity. In the distance, something moved. Ships, sensors, watchers retreating for now. The danger wasn't gone, just postponed. Garrett leaned back, exhaling. When this is over, we should talk about the ceremony. Kyreth's ears flicked. Yes, she said. We should. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them slept. The idea of the ceremony settled into the clinic like an object no one wanted to look directly at. Garrett brought it up once, officially, the way he brought up medical procedures or evacuation drills. Calm voice, neutral phrasing, pretending it was just another task to schedule between sterilization cycles and supply orders. There are records, he said, scrolling through a public archive on the console. Intercultural protocols. Your people have filed them. We can initiate the discharge properly. Kyreth stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth she radiated. She didn't look at the screen. Yes, she said. That is acceptable. Her agreement came too easily. Garrett frowned. You don't sound thrilled. Thrill is not a relevant metric, she replied. Then after a pause, but I am uncertain, he snorted. Welcome to the club. They began preparing, slowly, inefficiently, the way people do when they are absolutely not ready. Garrett requested the necessary components. Kyreth verified symbols and sequences, occasionally correcting the archive with mild disdain. These diagrams are simplified, she said. They assume emotional detachment. Well, that's optimistic, Garrett muttered. Despite everything, humor crept back in. When he mispronounced a ritual term badly enough to trigger an error tone, Kyreth covered her mouth, ears flicking in unmistakable amusement. You have just declared yourself legally flammable, she informed him. I hate it when that happens. She adjusted the settings. It is good that you are not attempting this alone. High praise. They delayed. Constantly. Garrett found reasons to double-check equipment that didn't need it. Kyreth recalculated timing windows that were already optimal. The ceremony could be done in a day. It stretched into weeks. Life, inconveniently, continued. Patients came. Systems failed. Kyreth remained efficient, protective, present. Garrett caught himself relying on her without thinking, handing her tools, asking for her assessment, sleeping more soundly, knowing she was nearby. One evening, while recalibrating the perimeter sensors together, Garrett broke the unspoken rule. What happens after? He asked. Kyreth didn't pretend not to understand. After the discharge? Yes, she considered. I am free to leave. And you would? I could. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes. I do not know. The honesty landed harder than certainty would have. Garrett laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. Figures. The one time I do the responsible thing, it gets complicated. You have been responsible consistently, she said. You simply do not acknowledge it. Don't ruin my self-image, she smiled faintly. The night before the scheduled ceremony, the clinic lost power. Not completely, emergency systems kicked in, but enough to leave the space dim and quiet, lit by soft amber panels. Garrett cursed under his breath, kneeling to access a junction panel. I swear, this place waits for dramatic timing. Kyreth crouched beside him. If it were intentional, I would admire it. You would. They worked in silence for a moment. Then Kyreth spoke, quietly. When the bond is discharged, she said, the neural reinforcement fades. The instinctual prioritization dissolves. Garrett swallowed. Does it hurt? No, she said. It is. Empty. Briefly. He forced a smile. That doesn't sound ominous at all. She glanced at him. You are afraid. Occupational hazard, he repeated. Garrett. He stopped working. Looked at her. You have filled space in your life that you believe was permanently vacant, she said. The bond merely illuminated it. He laughed weakly. You always have a way with devastating observations. I am trying to be gentle. Could have fooled me. The power returned with a soft hum. Lights brightened. The moment passed, but it didn't disappear. They slept poorly that night. Garrett lay awake listening to the clinic's familiar sounds, acutely aware that they might change. Kyreth remained awake too. He knew because he could feel it, the subtle awareness that had grown between them without him noticing. Morning came. The ritual space was prepared in the main treatment room. Symbols projected softly into the air, alien geometry intersecting with human tech in a way that felt almost symbolic. Kyreth stood within the designated field. Garrett stood opposite her. This is where I say something meaningful, isn't it? He asked. Yes. He cleared his throat. I'm bad at that. I know. He looked at her, really looked, at the long ears that marked her as other, at the familiar expression that had become part of his days. You didn't ruin my life, he said, just so we're clear. She tilted her head. I improved it. Yeah, he said. You did. The system waited, patient, uncaring. Garrett didn't activate it. Kyreth blinked. You are delaying. I'm reconsidering. Her ears flicked back. On what basis? He exhaled. On the basis that freeing you feels wrong, not because I want to own you or keep you bound, but because pretending this is just biology feels dishonest. The silence stretched. Garrett, she said carefully, if you choose not to discharge the bond, you must understand. I know, he interrupted, that it's not fair, that it's obligation. She stepped closer. Then why? He smiled, small and sincere. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as someone who had to stay. Kyreth searched his face. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. The ceremony can still proceed, she said. Discharge does not erase choice. He nodded slowly. Then maybe that's the point. They stood there, neither moving, not bound, not free, just choosing not to step away yet. The ceremony did not end with light or sound, or the sudden sense that something fundamental had snapped loose. It ended quietly. The system confirmed the discharge with a single, almost apologetic tone. The symbols in the air folded inward and vanished. Kyreth exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for weeks. Garrett waited. Nothing dramatic happened. The clinic did not shake. Kyreth did not collapse. The universe, annoyingly, continued exactly as it had been. Well, he said after a moment, I was expecting at least a headache. Kyreth flexed her fingers, then her shoulders. Her long ears twitched once, experimentally. I feel lighter, she said, and heavier. That sounds medically unhelpful. Yes, she agreed, it is. They stood there, facing each other across a space that no longer carried obligation. Garrett felt it immediately. Not loss exactly, but a subtle absence. The background hum he'd grown used to, the constant sense of being watched over, had softened, not gone, changed. "You can leave," he said. "Yes. You don't have to protect me anymore." "Correct." She smiled faintly. "You will be disappointed to learn that I am still very good at it." He laughed, really laughed. "Figures." The probe never returned. Whatever interest had been tracking Kyreth seemed to lose enthusiasm once the bond was discharged. The border went back to being its usual blend of chaos and neglect. Patience returned. The clinic returned to its familiar rhythm. Cleaner now, quieter, better run. Kyreth stayed. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. She took a formal position at the clinic after discovering that human bureaucracy was far more terrifying than any hostile force she'd faced. Garrett helped her file the paperwork. She helped him tolerate it. "You realize this makes us colleagues," he said. "Yes. And that means you can't threaten patients anymore." She considered. "I can threaten them metaphorically." Progress. Life settled into something sustainable. Shared routines, shared jokes. Kyreth learned sarcasm properly, deploying it with alarming accuracy. Garrett learned that not all silence meant solitude. One evening, as they watched ships drift past the clinic windows, Garrett realized something else had changed. He was no longer waiting, not for danger, not for departure, not for things to return to how they'd been. "This place used to feel temporary," he said. Kyreth glanced at him. "Does it still?" "No," he admitted. "It feels, lived in." She nodded. "Good." He smiled, warmth settling comfortably in his chest. The loneliness he'd carried for years hadn't vanished. It had been replaced. Carefully, intentionally. "You know," he said, "for someone who landed into my life bleeding, you've caused a lot of trouble." She tilted her head. "You say that as if you regret it." He shook his head. "Not even a little." Kyreth leaned back, ears flicking contentedly. "Then my presence was justified." "Don't push it." They watched the stars in companionable silence. Not bound by biology, not driven by debt, just two people who had chosen, against all expectations, to stay.